Recording in progress.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. In light of our chair being absent and us not having a vice chair until we get to that point of our agenda, I'll go ahead and get the July 8th Historic Preservation Board meeting underway. We'll go ahead with roll call. District 1,
Present.
District 2,
Present.
District 3,
Present.
District 4,
Present.
District 5,
Present.
District 6, Claire Willenberg is absent, and Mayor Appointee.
Present.
Very good. We have a quorum with 6 members. Moving on in the agenda, our next item is the approval of the July 8th, 2024 agenda. You all should have received an email earlier today with a bit of a change in our agenda. The very last item was going to be a presentation from the Kansas State Historic Preservation Officer. She requested to have that item rescheduled to the August meeting. So we need a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Klein moves to approve the agenda as amended.
Rowley seconds.
It's been motioned and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The motion passes. The next item on our agenda is to elect a chair and 2 vice chairs. I guess I will call for nominations, whether self or otherwise, for a chair position.
I'd like to nominate Bruce Rowley.
Bruce, do you accept that nomination? We always do. We can help you. We get a second to the nomination.
I second
I
that.
second.
So there's a nomination by Janice Baum-Dixon and a second by Klein. All in favor of Bruce Rowley for chair, signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Rowley, I will turn the meeting over to you to go for, we have 2, I'm not sure why we have 2 vice chairs, but we just need to do the same process twice to nominate vice chairs. I guess in the event that the chair and the vice chair are out, we would then have a person to run the meeting after that. So
I'm not as sharp on my Robert's Rules of Order as I used to be.
So we can call for nominations for vice chair.
We're calling for nominations for vice chair. Would be first vice chair, I guess.
I'll nominate myself.
Rowley seconds. All in favor of Chad Glenn as first vice chair, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Now we will be voting for second vice chair. Do I have a nomination for second vice chair? I'm going to nominate Steve Klein.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded, all in favor of Steve Klein as second vice chair.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, Steve. Miniature agenda.
We'll print you off a copy in the future.
Is there any correspondence today?
None at this time.
No correspondence. We have already approved the minutes, haven't we?
No, we approved the agenda. This is approval of the
Okay,
June
approval
10th.
of the 10th of June minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
Baum Dixon motions to approve the 10th June 2024 minutes.
Klein seconds.
All in favor?
Bruce, I need to abstain. I was absent.
I was also absent. Taylor.
I was absent as well.
I was,
Do we have a quorum to,
okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Approval of the 10th of June, 2024 minutes. Is there any public comment today? I see that we have at least one.
Yes, the agenda shows that we have one scheduled public comment regarding 1621 North Fairview Avenue. Just go ahead and come up to the mic, and I believe you'll have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Can I hand?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead and hand.
Sorry?
Yes, go ahead and hand out your.
All right, my name's Garrett Pepper. I actually have been looking at this property at 1621 North Fairview for about a year now, and I've been in contact with the seller or the owner for about that same time. She's wanting to move out of the area. So this home's in North Riverside, as I'm sure you're aware of. It's just a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. It's got an unfinished basement. It's about 900 square foot, 800 to 900 square foot, give or take. And we were looking at, my brother and I, and there's another friend of ours that's a partner, we were looking at purchasing the property and doing some renovations to it, upgrading, remodeling. We don't know if we're gonna, from there, sell it or rent it. So I also am a real estate agent for Berkshire Hathaway, and I pulled title work on it, and that's where this rabbit hole started. So I apologize, I had no idea it was even a process. So I found all the title work and all these extra amendments and addendums, so that's where we are today. So I started speaking with Christina, and she said, well, if you want to do anything to the property, if it's substantial, you need to present it to the board and everything. So it's not a formal presentation. I know it's more of a comment because we're still in the process of purchasing. We should be under contract this week, but I just thought I'd at least come here, learn about the process, what we need to do, make sure that we approach it, correctly. So I know I've only got 5 minutes, but I won't go over everything, but essentially, if we do siding for the exterior of the home, the roof is good. We've already had inspections done. Roof's good, sewer's good. We're looking at doing, if we need to do windows, that's if we need to. It would just be a single or a double hung vinyl window. Nothing, out of the ordinary or crazy. It would match the area of homes that are in it. That neighborhood from 15th to north there, there's some that are remodeled and there's some that aren't. So we're going to try and make it look just as similar as possible to the rest of the homes in the area and give it as much value as possible. So siding, same thing. We don't know if it needs siding. Probably just going to leave it, but we're going to paint it for sure. One of the biggest things was an egress window in the basement. The home, the grade where the basement is, it has not view out, but it has like daylight windows. And it's tall enough to where we could put an egress window in, adding a bedroom and bathroom downstairs. That's a big goal there. So otherwise, interior, it's just the kitchen's only 60 square feet. So we'd like to make that a little bigger. And it's got a non-load bearing wall that's in there. It looks like it was put in there after it's not original, just removing that. So essentially that's it though. I mean, and just updating the interior. All new appliances, floors, paint. We would have all the electric service updated too, new panel, box, meter, line, and everything. So I didn't know if that was something, or if this is something we have to get approval for, or if this suffice, or so not a public. Oh, I've been shut off.
So just for comment, sorry, Mr. Rowley, if you want to speak. Under public comment, there's no action taken by the board. You would have to submit your entire plans to Christina. She would go through it and be able to tell you whether you know, the house being listed, whether what you're proposing meets with the national standards for this kind of thing. We don't really go through and tell you what kind of roof to put on, stuff like that. Here, she will take care of that before you bring the application before the board. So, I mean, if you want, I mean, procedurally wise, that's kind of what you're gonna have to do, but we don't sit there and comment on, you wanna put a egress window in, that kind of thing, especially on public comment. That's not the proper procedure for going forward.
Well, okay. Well, thank you.
I would just say, thanks for coming down. It's not as daunting a process as maybe you've heard. We try to approach it from a really common sense standpoint, and having that conversation with Christina will be really helpful.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Unfinished business.
Good afternoon, Historic Preservation Board. Philip Zievenbergen with planning staff on behalf of Christina Reith, who is unable to be here today. The unfinished business item is HPC 2024-00042. This is related to a project located at 800 East First Street North. If you recall, on May 13th, this case was originally reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board, and the action of the HPB at that time was to defer action until revisions were made to address concerns raised at the meeting of that at that time. Since then, the applicant has submitted revisions to their signed proposal, which we'll discuss today. And essentially will then move this project along. You'll have the opportunity to take final action based on the revisions that are presented today. As a reminder, the applicant is requesting three things: to replace the existing blade sign on the west side of the south facade of the property, install an additional illuminated blade sign above the location of the existing one, and install an illuminated sign on the east side of the south facade of the property as well. This building at 800 East First Street North is a key contributing building in the Warehouse and Jobbers Historic District. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It is also located in the Old Town overlay. The applicant is requesting these modifications for an existing tenant in the building. Since the last HPB meeting, the applicant has proposed removing the neon tubing around the perimeter of the building near the cornice, replacing the existing blade sign, replacing the flush-mounted sign with an additional blade sign, and installing a front lighted channel letter sign on the other side of that facade. The applicant now requests to illuminate the signs with white lighting instead of RBG lighting. The two proposed blade signs overall measure 33 feet by 8 inches in height and 5 feet 10 inches in width and 2 feet 6 inches in thickness. All signs shall have a gray background and white text with some orange accents and boarding on the top of the sign. The bottom blade sign shall display all but one tenant that occupies the space. The top blade sign is for the remaining tenant. Additional measurements are attached in the report for your review, which is what you see on the screen. The small logo signage would measure 2 feet 7 inches by 3 feet 4 inches and would be placed on top of the floor of the existing building. The materials, color scheme, and illumination match that of the blade sign, and according to the agent for the applicant, this will be on a controlled background, reducing the power penetrations from 4 power holes to 1. Attachment points would also be reduced from 12 to 4 or 5. All attachments would be through the mortar. Because this is coming back, I think we can move on from the summary of the Warehouse and Jobbers districts, unless anybody wants a refresher on what that district is about, but kind of just for the sake of time, that's also listed in your staff report if you want a refresher on this historic district. Case history on the property: in 2004, the property was listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a contributing building. In 2014, the Historic Preservation Board approved the repair and removal of existing stairs to be replaced with a raised patio and railing that's 2014 00046. Based on the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation and the current and revised architectural design guidelines of the Old Town District, staff recommends approval of the application. There will be a recommended motion on the screen for someone to read should they choose to approve. This is based on standards 9 and 10, which are that new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, and the spatial relationships that characterize the property. The new work will be differentiated from the old and will be compatible with the historic materials, feature, size, scale, and proportion, and massing to protect the integrity of the property and its environment. New additions and adjacent to, and number 10 says, new additions and adjacent or related new construction will be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property with its environment would be unimpaired. It is staff's opinion that the differentiation from the old is compatible with the historic materials and spatial relationship that is characterizing the property, and it is not consistent with other non-illuminated signs on the building. The applicant has disclosed that the proposed sign will also create intrusions into the mortar, which minimizes the damage to the character-defining brick. The proposed signage meets the following guidelines established in the current and revised architectural design guidelines for the Old Town District. The overall facade composition, including ornamental details and signs, should be coordinated. Signs should also be in proportion to the building, such that they do not dominate its appearance. And with that, I'll stand for questions. I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but I will also let the applicant or agent address any questions that you might have as well. As a reminder, if you want to go back to that slide you just had, I don't think we have the old pictures in there. If you go to the nighttime rendering that was just on the screen, just as a reminder, I'll point out where there was going to be a neon. The original rendering had like a neon band that would go around the perimeter of the top that could change light or change color variations that would be mimicked in the sign. And that was one of the major things that they removed in addition to the revisions they did on the sign.
Well, we've seen this before, and for those that didn't know, Claire and I met with the applicant and discussed what their goals were and talked through what we saw as particularly egregious about the last application.
I will turn it over to the agent or applicant.
All right, so as Philip mentioned, we did remove the neon here. We also had a sign on the west and south face that we have blended into one projecting blade sign. We also created a plan to portray additional tenant panels or replace the existing tenant panel sign with the tenant panel sign we've shown before below. This sign is now lighted where the previous one was unlighted. This gives the landlord the ability to show signage, create a plan for current tenants or future tenants as they change out. So, does anyone have any questions?
One of these showed, like, is there an additional B mark on the south face, kind of on
Yes.
the upper right-hand side? Just none of the images show them both at the same time.
It doesn't show them at the same time, but do you want to see that slide by itself?
Yeah, can we just go to the night rendering? I just want to make sure I understand that this is like the perpendiculars is on the west end of the south face, and the B mark is on, yeah, like the far right, top right corner of this same view.
So yeah, the B's here. I don't know if I have control over this, so, okay. So this is on the east side of the south face. And the B is built onto a controlled background. So that background's 2 inches deep. So we're able to bring one power whip into there, also house power supplies, and it's a much less intrusive install than if we installed the four components of this B individually.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any public comment?
Okay, hearing none. Is there any discussion here among the board members?
If you could go back to the motion slide, please.
I'll move to find that the proposed signage meets the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties as reviewed in accordance with KSA 75-2724 and will not damage or destroy any historically significant property or historic character defining features, and recommend approval of the sign permit associated with the work at 800 East First Street North as presented today.
Do we have a second?
Klein seconds.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Consent agenda is next.
Yes, so the items that were reviewed by staff in accordance with KSA 75-2725 as amended in section 2.2.1015 through 1025 of the Wichita City Code of Ordinances. HBC 2024-57 is the Wilson Boyle House. They're replacing a railing around top of the 1969 carport, broken concrete on top and underneath the carport, rebuilt stairs, and construction of 15 by 22 detached pergola atop carport that will not be visible from the street. This is at 225 North Roosevelt Avenue, and staff is recommending it be approved administratively. That's why it's on the consent agenda. HBC 2024-58 is the Park Place Fairview Historic District. It's an interior remodel, installing a new kitchen cabinets, upgrading electrical to 4 circuits to meet the code, move sink, patch drywall where holes were created to access electric and plumbing. This is at 1542 North Fairview Avenue. And finally, HBC 2024-59 is the Sternberg Mansion. Install 2 new 100,000 BTU furnaces, 2 condensers with A coil, install ductwork and accessories, grills, registers, diffusers, line sets, fuses, whips, pads, and new filter racks and filters. Will not cause any new penetrations to the exterior. This is at 1065 North Waco.
Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chad, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Per the statement on the screen?
I move to support the recommendations of the Historic Preservation Board staff and find that proposals meet the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties as reviewed in accordance with KSA 75-2724. It will not damage or destroy any historically significant property or historic character defining features, and recommend approval of the building permits associated with the work at 225 North Roosevelt, 1542 North Fairview Avenue, and 1065 North Waco Avenue.
Taylor will second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries.
Our project review item today is HPC 2023-00125. This is submitted by Union Station LLC with New Line Signs as the agent.
Philip, I'm sorry, but you've got a different case up on the screen.
Okay, it might just have a wrong case number on the staff report. I apologize.
Yeah, I think this one has a 23 number and a 24 number. Like the packet needs.
Either way, it's HPC 2462. Overall, this is a case that is a resubmittal of a previously reviewed application that was denied. Earlier in 2024, the applicant submitted a request for a 8-foot 5-inch by 10-foot 3-inch aluminum channel letter sign on the building's front facade, which is the north facade. That's HPC 23125. HPC denied that request at that time. This is a resubmittal of an application. According to section 2.12.1023 of the Code of the City of Wichita, a resubmittal of applications will not be accepted for additional hearing within the 12-month period from the date of the final decision, except upon written request by the applicant indicating any changes in plans and specifications made in the original application. The application before you today is different. It has some changes to it, which we'll outline in the discussion hereon. Overall, the applicant is requesting 4 things: to install a 3-part illuminated sign on the north front facade of the building, replace the panel on an existing monument sign on site, and install a vinyl decals on the easternmost entrance of the north facade and interior entrances, install flat cutout or FCO signs throughout the interior of the tenant space. This is on the Union Station building, which is 701 to 703 East Douglas Avenue. It is a key contributing structure in the East Douglas Avenue Historic District, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The applicant is requesting these modifications for a tenant inside the building. The previous requested sign measured 4 foot 10 inches by 4 foot 3 inches for the top logo sign. The revised sign proposes a top logo sign that measures 4 foot 6 inches by 4 feet flat. So it is slightly different in dimension. It appears to be slightly smaller. The change to the total height of the triplet sign from 8 feet 4 inches to 8 feet 3 inches. And the sign would be installed into the mortar, which was repointed during the building's renovation in 2018. The sign remains divided into 3 parts: the logo of the tenant at the top, followed by the name of the tenant at the bottom, 1 word for each line. The second line reads Simmons and the bottom line says Bank. The logo has a black outline with atomic red and white elements. The subsequent 2 lines are black and 1 foot 6 inches in height. Simmons is 10 feet 2 inches in height, or 2 inches long, and the bank is 4 feet 10 inches long. The proposed sign features aluminum channel letters with acrylic letter faces, and it is illuminated with white LED. It will be flush with the wall, and there's additional details regarding the installation of the sign in the report. The applicant also requests to apply vinyl decals to the easternmost set of exterior double doors on the north front facade, as well as 2 sets of interior double doors which are accessed by the main hall. These aluminum framed glass doors are not original to the building. Lastly, the applicant requests to install additional FCO signage on the interior near the ATM and within the vestibule, which can all be accessed from the easternmost exterior doors of the north front facade. The proposed FCO signs are installed with the VHB tape and silicone adhesive. The decals for the FCO signs use the same colors as the proposed illuminated signage, atomic red, black, and white. The measurements of the sign and spacing of the text are attached to the report. This is in the East Douglas Avenue Historic District. I think, again, for the sake of time and the fact that this was recently reviewed by the HPB for a different case, the previously applied one, we can move on to other parts of the report unless anybody has any questions or information they like regarding the background. I will take the time to read the excerpt for the 701 East Douglas Wichita Union Station, as it is a key contributing building. The 3-story Beaux Arts Union Station is constructed of concrete, stone, and terracotta. The character-defining features of the style found on this building are the full-height coupled columns and arched openings between the columns featured featuring windows that extend full height as well. The verticality of the front is further emphasized by the vertical sashes in the tall windows set between the columns. The metal windows framed are noteworthy for their elaborate decorations. The front elevation is strictly symmetrical, and the building is divided into clearly articulated parts. A massive entabulated full articulated with architrave, frieze, and cornice is executed in the iconic mat order. Metal canopies on the front formerly provided support for awnings. A large addition to the south formerly contained baggage and freight rooms. There are large areas of windows with multiple vertical sashes immediately south of the main Union Station wing, but the building becomes more utilitarian in its design toward the south or rear. There is a brick drive in front of the building. There's some extensive case history regarding this dating back to 2004 when it was put on the National Register of Historic Places as a key contributing building. There's been several reviews for signage as well as a detached storm shelter throughout the years, culminating in the most recent request for a sign on the front facade, the HPC 2023-00125 that was recently denied by the HPB. Overall, based on the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation and the design guidelines for the East Douglas Historic District, staff recommends approval of the monument sign, vinyl decals, and the FCO signage. And staff recommends denial of the illuminated sign on the facade. There will be recommended motions on the screen. However, if it is the will of the board to recommend approval, we can basically put the approval recommendation and you can make the modified statement accordingly. The proposed illuminated sign, so this is some findings related to the recommendation for denial. The proposed illuminated sign does not follow standard number 9, which states that new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the property. The new work will be differentiated from the old and will be compatible with the historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion and massing to protect the integrity of the property and its environment. It is staff's opinion that while the proposed signage is differentiated from the original stone exterior, the differentiation is not compatible with the building's historic materials, namely for its illumination, materials, and color. The proposed installation into the mortar shall not damage or destroy any of the building's character-defining features, but it will negatively impact the spatial relationships that characterize the property. The proposed illuminated sign does not meet the following guidelines of the East Douglas Historic Design District. Number 2 says building signs should be located so as to not dominate the building and so as to emphasize architectural elements. Such signs should not obscure architectural details nor cover windows or moldings. And number 8 said for buildings with multiple tenants, one sign for all tenants is encouraged. It is staff's opinion that the placement and colors of the proposed illuminated signage detract from the character-defining stone exterior and the overall composition of the main facade. According to the site plan submitted by the agent for the applicant, the illuminated signage is for one tenant with a multiple tenant space. Allowing the single sign on the front facade implies that there would only be one occupant in the space. So moving on to the monument signage, vinyl decals, and the FCO sign that was recommended for approval. These meet standards 9 and 10. Again, we just read standard number 9 that things should be differentiated and not destroy historic materials and spatial relationships. Number 10 says new additions and adjacent or related new construction will be undertaken in a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. Regarding the signage and the design guidelines for the East Douglas Historic District, number 2 states that building signs should be located as to not dominate the building and so as to emphasize the architectural elements. Such signs should not obscure architectural details nor cover windows or moldings. And number 8 says for buildings with multiple tenants, one side for all tenant is encouraged. The applicant is requesting to replace a panel of the existing monument sign, which keeps in spirit with these design guidelines. The vinyl decal shall be placed on the easternmost entrance of the exterior. Existing plantings
Existing planters directly in front of this entrance obscure its visibility from the street. Similarly, the decal on the interior entrance doors are not visible from the street. It is staff's opinion that the FCO signage will not damage or destroy any historic materials or the interior, even if they are removed in the future. And the images have been cycling through as I've been reading. With that, I will stand for questions.
Yeah. I had some questions and I didn't see it. There were some details shown, and this may be a question for the applicant. But, one of the issues was the mortar joints and that, any attachments and, speaking about the facade would be through the mortar. But there's a detail, the detail's there. On the lower one, if I see it properly, it shows that one. And it looks like there's two different, one for the electrical and one to hold the channel. And so I'm wondering how that would work in a single mortar joint.
So we'll defer to the applicant on that.
Any other questions before we have the applicant in? Let's hear from the applicant now.
All right, good afternoon. I am Mike Drury with Chandler Signs, representing Simmons Bank and the property owners for this project. The reason that we're back is, yes, we did modify the sign slightly, but more importantly, I think we added a lot of detail and notes to our drawings for a couple of reasons. But we feel like that was not 100% clear, just like the question that the gentleman had about the mortar joints. We explained that, we tried to explain that during our presentation a couple of months ago. But the problem is the drawing that you guys have in your package, if you remember, because of the cyber issues, when I was here 2 months ago, and forgive me, I can't remember her name, but Christine, she acknowledged that she had the wrong drawings in the package. She didn't have the latest drawings we had even sent. So I believe in this package, if you will go on past this, because what this shows is the letters, essentially what we refer to as flush mount. They're on clips. This is not how these letters are being mounted. If you will go on to the, I think the last 3 pages or 4 pages, she has added our latest submittal that is designed to clarify all of these details for you guys.
I didn't see those.
I think that's his point. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'm looking at the big staff report, and it's the last few package. So throughout the package, she's got all of our original drawings, and then it looks like she added the last. Y'all don't have it?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe they are referencing the second to last page
of the staff report.
It shows, and it actually physically identifies where the mortar joints are, and showing that the holes being penetrated through are through the mortar joints.
Y'all don't have that to put on the
Thank
screen?
you, that clarifies. I've seen that.
I got a question for you. What size are those blocks on that facade?
Pardon me?
What size are the blocks on the facade?
The actual,
The mortar joints?
the blocks that they have, the mortar joints are between 5/8 and a half inch.
No, the center line.
The blocks themselves, I don't have those notes with me right now. I apologize for that. Basically, what we've done is we've designed the sign as opposed to the way the top is shown where there's clips and we're going through more mortar joints. We've designed the sign to be on a raceway. And what that means is you have one structure that goes across the facade with only 2, maybe 3, probably only 2 anchor points. And what we will actually do is have our installer take and do a paper pattern a rubbing, as we refer to it. They'll go to the location where the sign's going to go. They literally, it's kind of old school, tape this pattern paper on the wall and do a rubbing of the actual mortar joints. So we can then take that into our computer CAD system and place the sign exactly to where the sign maintains its integrity of the spacing of the logo to the letters, but all of the attachment points go directly through the mortar joints. So the important part here was to make sure that was clear, which obviously unfortunately, we don't have the drawing up there again, but we have detailed in the drawing. Number one, the mortar, as you guys discussed with the previous applicant on the other sign project, the mortar is not historic. In fact, this building was tuck pointed in 2018 where they redid the mortar. So the mortar is not historic. So that's the main way of attaching. In fact, we even included in the package that we don't have up here, I even included, just as an example, a 120-year-old historic building we did hotel signs for in Pittsburgh that show the exact same type of installation, even with flag poles and the tie downs for the flags, how careful we were to make sure we're in the mortar joints to maintain the integrity of the granite. So a few of the items that were addressed. Number one, in referring back to the what was the term? The Secretary of Interior standards for the design guidelines. The comments are made that, number one, we are damaging the building, which we are not. We're not damaging anything historical. And number two, the comment on the spatial dominance of the building. The elevation of this building is roughly 3,600 square feet. Our sign is 83. That is 2.3%. We are using black as our dominant color, which ties in with the canopies. It kind of ties in with the trim of the windows. The only color we've introduced, because it's a signature color for Simmons Bank, is the red, and it's in a very small percentage of the sign. So what we're trying to do is honor the spirit and the integrity of the historic nature of this building and this entire district, but at the same time, find a way for a business to conduct business in this building. The monument sign, one other comment that I wanted to address in here, where it says the buildings with multiple tenants, and this is one sign for one tenant. But the whole purpose of this monument sign right here is for the other tenants. This building is a very narrow, as far as usual retail and office space, it's very narrow and deep. So your front tenant is the natural one to have the signage. That's where the walk-in business for the bank is coming from. So the bank has that. The other tenants have, number one, the option of the multi-tenant sign, which we will have a space on also. But number two, in the back of the building where it's not historic, they'll be putting signs on it. So we wanted to come back. I also have Gary O'Borney with me, representing the ownership and more of the historical side, more of the knowledge of the historic side of the building. So he's got a few things he'd like to say also. Before I hand it over to him, are there any questions about the specifics of the signs? Just so we're clear, those letters are black. They light white at night. There's no crazy colors involved. There's no RGB. There's none of that. So it's a very straightforward, simple sign package. And as far as all the other signs that they commented on approval on, just so we're 100% clear, all of the FCOs and all that, those will be going and installed on interior office spaces on new walls as they build out their space. So those are just going on sheetrock walls that are for the tenant space. So the reality is this is the only sign that I think is anybody have any concern for. But are there any questions about the sign itself or any of the issues that I've mentioned?
I think Chad's question about the size of the blocks was that if you take the detail, your corrected detail to scale, that shows like that the power goes in one joint and then the actual mount is one joint above that, and those are 4 inches apart. And these appear to be 18-inch tall or 24-inch blocks. I assume you can do that horizontally also, like they don't have to be stacked.
If I can, let me approach you and show you the difference. this answers that question.
I guess what I'm getting at is these can be all in a horizontal joint, just sort of down the way.
Yes.
Yeah,
And-
okay.
and there literally will be, for the logo, there will be 2 attachment points, 1 electrical. For the Simmons, there will be 2 attachment points, 1 electrical.
Sir, can you?
I'm sorry, can you state the mic?
I was gonna show them something here, but for bank, there will be 2 attachment points and 1 electrical. And
You
those,
have plenty of mortar joint available to do this behind all of
Exactly.
the things you're planning to
it'll
do.
be completely hidden. And very small in number.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll let Gary.
Good afternoon. Gary O'Borney, I'm the CEO, President of Oxnell Management, and the Managing Partner of Union Station. We've been involved in historical properties for almost 30 years in Wichita in the state of Kansas. We've participated in committees and boards, and we've testified at the state level and the city level and the county level on historical properties and historical tax credits and things of that nature. So we are an advocate of historical properties. And for 30 years, we have been developers and caretakers of historical properties. So it's something that's very close to us and something that is important to us. And the pride that's involved in historical properties, it's not always the most profitable venture to do historical property. There are a lot of demands. There are a number of economic issues and approvals and regulations and things of that nature that make historical properties sometimes challenging. So it's very important that we support historical properties and that they're viable for today's commercial businesses. And that is the best way for us to preserve these properties. If not, what we see properties that set vacant for long periods of time, and often sometimes we have to demo those properties because then they become obsolete structurally and economically are not viable anymore even to rehab. When Wichita first started this process of developing downtown, we were very involved in the committees involved in downtown development. We participated with the city and the county in regard to a project, education project in Portland, Oregon, in which the city and the state and the county all participated along with a number of us that are involved in historical properties. And the one major thing that we found was when you look at all the historical regions around the United States, the ones that were the most successful were the ones that allowed flexibility when you had unique properties that didn't meet their code or didn't necessarily meet all of the boxes to be checked for regulation. And those properties and those areas of the regions were the ones that really were most successful. And so we knew when we started downtown development work that that was going to have to be a part of this process. And so in regard to Union Station, it's a very unique property. It's altogether almost 10 acres. And it's very elongated. So when you have frontage of roughly about 90 foot of the building, but yet the building is over 400 feet long, because it's multi-tenant, in this case, Simmons really is the only tenant that has frontage on Douglas. And the pylon square footage, because we're limited by how large the pylon signs can be, then those multi-tenants have to have visibility because they are not on a major thoroughfare. And so the pylon allows for that major thoroughfare to be recognized or utilized to be recognized for those tenants that are deep in the campus. This has been a challenging property to lease because of the depth of it. Every day we continue to work the property very hard, but visibility is very important for these businesses to be successful. I think we have a couple of items I want to just hand out real quick and take you through. While she's passing it, I'll just add, we bought this property 12 years ago, and Union Station sat vacant for 7 years. So for 19 years, this project's been under development from vacancy of 7 years all the way to current 12 years. Good, okay. The first one I'm going to show you is hopefully the packet that has the actual Union Station building. If you look on the awnings, you will see that there actually is signage on the awning that dates back clearly to the historical significance of the building. Very last page is when Wilder Wilson came to christen the Union Station. Of course, he didn't make it. He had a stroke and was not able to attend and later on died. But you can see through the years, we still have the original sign that has Union Station that was on the awning. So there were signage on the facade of this building historically. The next one I take you to is it should have a large R on it. The next packet. This is directly across the street. And this is a historical building that went through the process. It has neon, it has surface mounted, and again, in regard to the building, it's roughly in some dimensions about the same size. You can see the second page, another historical building where the same process was done. And again, third and fourth, you can see all of these were on historical buildings that signage was utilized and flexibility was applied and decisions were made in order to support that. And then the third page I would submit to you is from Jeff Fleur. Jeff Fleur is the president of Wichita Downtown Development. Jeff and his team have reviewed our sign request package and has provided a lot of examples and feedback to us on other areas in Old Town that our requests that we're asking to sign this property in the way that we're asking is not unreasonable. And the Downtown Wichita Development Corporation and their director, Jeff Fleur, support our request for approval of this signage for Union Station. In regard to the Downtown Historical District guidelines, the main objective of that is that it does not dominate the building, just like in the federal regs where from the standards for historical properties, the spatial relationships is that, again, that the signage does not dominate the building. And we would submit that a 2.5% coverage of a building is not dominating the facade of that building. And so we would ask for your support in regard to supporting our request to approve the signage for Union Station as submitted today for Simmons Bank. And I stand for any questions.
Yeah, I thank you for all, I think you've cleared up the issues about the mortar joints and appropriateness and that it won't cause damage to the building. And I also appreciate the information like the historic photos with showing the signage, but the signage was on the canopies. And I just wanted to bring up with Old Town, which is more industrial in character. And Old Town has had a history of having larger signs, more industrial character, like what we saw with the Blade sign, which we previously have approved. And so it's a very different context than this Beaux Arts building and how historically Beaux Arts buildings were treated different from industrial buildings. And, you know, with Beaux Arts buildings or buildings of this significance, monument signs are usually the first choice, which you have had out there. Then another option would potentially be on the canopies to do something that's how they were historically on buildings of this significance. And another option could be with this building, the Simmons Bank sign without the logo, I view as more appropriate for this highly significant building. And unfortunately, I'm new to the board. I was not here the first time it went around, so did not have the opportunity to express my thoughts. So I'm more or less doing them now. I wish I had been here then to possibly express my thoughts on that, and appreciated all you've done. And we all want it to be successful. My background is as an architect, working with developers, working on historic buildings, doing the federal and state tax credits and all of those things. So appreciate, you all going through the process of making it a success. And there are a lot of things that are successful, but just wanted to comment on the signage based on an interpretation of the Secretary of Interior standards. Thank you.
My only comment is that to note that on the pylon sign, we're very limited by the space on the pylon sign. And so our plan is not to technically have Simmons Bank on the pylon sign. We would like to have it on the facade so that we leave the rest of the square footage for the tenants that need it, that are very deep and don't have that ability to have any kind of sign frontage on Douglas.
I understand, and I know your bank is there and in the plans in the way to come in, but another thing would be to have the Simmons Bank, just the letters, and not have the logo out of respect for the Beaux-Arts building. That was just a suggestion, or do a smaller monument sign or a smaller sign on your entrance canopy. That just, to be with what was there historically. That's all. Thank you.
Gary, what is the size of the footprint that Simmons Bank will have in this property?
They're about 15,000 feet.
And is that?
This will be a regional headquarters for them.
So the front building is quite separate from all the behind it. So how does that allocate to space in that main front building?
In regard to the entire building itself?
To the entire, I guess I would
Square
say,
footage.
Original front portion of the building.
It'd be roughly probably, I would say probably about 20, 30%.
And they'll be the only tenant that will have their own entrance. The other entrance to Union Station will be a common entrance. So Simmons Bank will have their own entrance right there. So no other tenant will have an entrance on the front of the building.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to add, I looked at the U.S. Department of the Interior National Park Services presentation brief number 25, and going along with what Steve said previously, it said one of the criteria is the materials should be those of the historic buildings, the period and style. And I'm not sure that those materials would go with the period and style. I do like Steve's, what he pointed out, the awning, how in pictures that you have presented shows that's how they did signage back in that period.
Are there any other questions or comments for Gary?
Just for the historical side of things, what we are doing is an aluminum channel letter with an acrylic face and LED illumination. The only difference going back 100 years is that we are using LEDs instead of neon, and the acrylics are modified acrylics instead of plain old plastic. And the returns of the letters are aluminum instead of sheet metal. But channel letters like this go back that far. So they are historic. The materials have advanced, the technologies have advanced, but there were letters like this on buildings 100 years ago.
We have put lettering and signage on properties before with awnings. In regard to these awnings, because of the way they're built, it's a forged iron and casted, and so extremely thick and very difficult. Through the process, we looked early on about when we designed all this and prepared to rehab the building, we looked at signage on the awnings. There's glass on those awnings, and you have to be really careful about how snow builds up on the awnings because of weight. And then there's been a history, when we looked at the building, there was history of how snow accumulated on the top and moisture and how it trapped it. and kept it from draining off correctly, and it actually impacted the building and the stone. We had quite a bit of work that we had to do to fix that water damage that was created from that process. And so we've been extremely sensitive about the canopies, and aesthetically myself, to put signage out away from that. One, it doesn't appear very well. Basically putting it against a contrasting background, to me, is a better look versus it standing out just out there on its own. Our personal view is that that's not an aesthetic that we thought was really very amenable to the building itself. But mainly the decision was because of the mechanics of those awnings.
Thank you. Is there any discussion among the board?
Mr. Chairman? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Claire Willenberg, and I apologize to the board. Somehow I really messed up. On my personal calendar, I put this next week. I should have known better. I have been here for this entire presentation, and I'm hoping I would be allowed to vote.
Yes, you're allowed.
Okay, I don't have as much concern. I mean, I'm comfortable with the attachments. I'm not comfortable with the design. I think it looks too modern, but in general, I'm against any facade mounted signage because of the spatial relationship. I would be very much in favor of a second monument sign, as was suggested. I have no problem with the current monument or the decals on the back and interior. I just cannot believe that it's appropriate to put facade signage on this particular building. Thank you.
My primary concern is the reason this was denied or tabled last time was because of spatial relationships and the impact that, even though this is 2 to 3%, has on the symmetry and the composition of the facade. That was the primary reason that this was not approved the last time we looked at this, and that portion of this essentially has had no revision whatsoever.
Anyone else? I looked at this before, and it still, to me, does not appear to dominate the front of the building. It is a massive building, and to put a single tenant in there and have that tenant take that entire space and not give them the opportunity to have a sign that represents some semblance of the space, their relationship with that building, I think it's a mistake. And I think we run the risk of dooming these buildings to being empty because we don't like the fact that it's a modern logo. Well, of course it's a modern logo. It's a modern business. We don't like the fact that they want to put a sign on a building, but these buildings are not art to just be stared at from afar. They're meant to be functional, in my view, and the guidelines are meant to help us find ways to create balance where they can be utilized and become functional for decades and centuries in some of these cases, and not be ruined or abused. And I mean, from a physical standpoint, of course, that's very clear now. There's no damage being done to this building. But I think if we could pull up the slide of the building with the sign on the facade and ask ourselves, when you're driving past this building on Douglas, does it truly dominate this building in a way that is, I don't see it as being out of proportion with the size and majesty of this building. It says this is the primary tenant in this building. And to make it any smaller or relegate it to the pylon sign says we'd rather not have you in this building.
Yeah, I totally agree and empathize with, like, the people that occupy the front of the building should have a mark on the front of the building. I think what's missing, especially from a lot of these case studies and from the lack of change from last time, is that none of the case studies match the type of building that we're looking at now. I mean, this isn't they didn't go look at how did Intrust take their bank on Douglas, like what does the face of that look like? You know, something that's a little bit more comparable to use as a case study to perhaps give us a little bit more creative options than just repeating what was brought the last time and denied.
And also, as I was bringing up with mine, and certainly understand them wanting to have it marked as that's the entrance, but there also is a middle ground. And I don't know whether it would be acceptable to the applicants, but one of the things that I find with the building is the logo, but not the channel lettering. And so if this was a project I was working on, I would have suggested just doing the Simmons Bank channel lettering there by their entrance to market without the logo as a compromise to the Beaux Art style of the building. And I think if you look at it, it's very respectful. And we certainly want, Simmons Bank to be successful, and they are a very successful bank. I'm very familiar with them. And so, that's certainly, something, and appreciate them moving into the building and, making it a viable building. And I think they're a fantastic anchor. It's just also being respectful to the building. We are the Historic Preservation Board, and just, trying to also be respectful to the building and the historic preservation aspects of it. So.
Well, Steve, the whole purpose of the board, and I agree with you, is to discuss and interpret. Because otherwise, there would just be simply a set of rules that you read and somebody says yes or no. I wish it were that simple even with electrical code or whatever, but that is basically it. When we look at electrical or plumbing code, you either did it right or you didn't do it right. And in this case, there is leeway to allow, in my belief, to allow for usage, for every case to be looked at individually for how does this really fit with this building in this scenario with this use, as opposed to just a set of, otherwise I think we would have had a much more rigid set of rules given. And then that's why we're here to discuss it and say, I feel one way about it, somebody else interprets it a different way.
I agree totally. And the Secretary of Interior Standards was written that way. It's interpreted federally, statewide, and locally. And there are interpretations sort of to it based on the building that you're talking about to have that flexibility.
So it feels to me like this discussion, unless somebody else has other things to add to it, is really focused on scale and size, as well as
Yeah, I would
color.
agree. And the size, scale, and massing is one way, in my opinion, with the Secretary of Interior Standards. If you're respectful to size, scale, and massing, you can have more flexibility in what you do to a historic building, and also how you interpret contemporary but compatible, which is probably the hardest thing to interpret in the Secretary of Interior Standards.
Yeah, well, they've always been confusing to me because on the one hand, it says you may need to make sure like it doesn't look like the actual historic building, but we also want you to use materials and looks that are compatible with that historic period, which I understand somewhat what they're getting at, but it's a bit confusing.
Yeah, and it is because they don't want you to think something is historic that is not. And so that's, one of the main, and I apologize for this thing, but I started my government career with the National Park Service in the technical services branch. that interpreted the Secretary of Interior standards, so.
Chad, I would like to hear what you think about the impact to, because I agree. I think we're talking about scale, massing, proportion, symmetry. I don't think anybody's hung. I trust them to get it in the mortar. You're gonna use aluminum with modified acrylic. Like, okay, I think everybody's good with that. But thoughts on the massing proportion issues?
Yeah, I think for me, the economic impact of having a sign there, I get that part. I wish it was the Economic Impact Board, because I could comment on that part. Being the Historic Preservation Board, only thing I can truly comment on is the looks of that sign. The one concern I have, we all know how development works. We got one main tenant on the front side right now. Pretty soon there becomes a second or third for some reason. We've already set a precedent for allowing one sign on there. Now we got to get a third and a fourth and a fifth. Then we start jumping over their side, and pretty soon those two sides become full of signs. So I am concerned with that. I don't think the imagery about the Old Town signage is at all consistent with what this is in regards to the style of that front facade. So I have concerns with the look of that front facade being, in my opinion, it's dominated by that signage. Because that's the first thing that my eye goes to is that red mark on the left side.
Well, it seems like we're at a point where we need to have a motion one way or the other.
I'll go ahead. Can I go ahead on the easy one?
Yeah, it was like, so the top
anybody have
one is for the illuminated side, the bottom one is for the other. Sure, you can, I would say it would be worth taking two motions on this because it seems like everybody's kind of in agreement on one and there's the discussion on the other.
Okay, well, I'll start with the easy one. You said that's the bottom one. Okay, I move to find, this is Taylor. I move to find that the proposed monument decal and interior signage meets the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties as reviewed in accordance with KSA 75-2724 and will not damage or destroy any historically significant property or historic character defining features, and recommend approval of the aforementioned signage at 701 to 703 East Douglas Avenue.
I second. Klein second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
I really think at this point it is back at the board unless you want to turn it back over to, you had brought it back to the board for discussion.
I think at this point it's fair to turn it back over. I don't think any of us want to see this go round and round and round monthly, so I'm happy to put it back to the applicant.
I just wonder, I was here the last time that we were here, and with basis, you guys came up with this committee that you came up with what would work. Is that an option this time? Can we meet with you and discuss what will work, what will be approved? Because I don't want to keep coming back and just getting declined.
Yeah, we don't want that either. So, I think that is most certainly an option. You can table this, defer it.
Yeah. You can defer the item and you can have up to 3 into a committee.
Is that what you'd like to do?
Yes.
Okay. I have no idea how to do that.
Just move to
defer for a date certain.
And give it like 2 months or 1 month.
The August meeting?
Provided they have the ability to meet as a committee to meet. I'm not going to force them. So I understand, but you guys it's your schedule. So I can't put a date on you like that without knowing that the committee could meet by that time. So
I would suggest we have a design review committee of volunteers that try to make the next month deadline.
So I would like to move that we table, what are we calling? That we defer this motion until, or this item, until the following meeting in August and establish a design committee to meet with the applicant prior to that meeting in August.
Taylor,
Second.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Do a show of hands of who's willing to serve on the 3-panel committee.
So we have Klein, Rowley, and Taylor on the design committee.
All right. Thank you.
And just for coordination purposes, after the meeting, if you guys could meet with them and maybe try to set up a date so it doesn't, time goes by awfully quick. If we don't get moving, thank you.
Motion for adjournment.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Klein moves to adjourn.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Klein.
Klein moves to adjourn.
Willenberg seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed. Meeting is adjourned.